everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so glad you're here because today we're diving into a topic that affects all of us: how to maintain and remain steady and centered when dealing with the ups and downs of life, wins and losses, praise and criticism. So we're joined again by Madhu today to guide us in this discussion. Welcome, Madhu. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you, Sienna.
Yeah, so without further ado, we can get started with today.
Okay, great. So thanks again for inviting me on to speak. I'm very excited to speak about this topic. For those of you who have not yet seen the previous one, which was about Bhagavad Gita 2.14, I think that is due to go up. There was some connectivity issues. So it's Sundar Gopal Prabhu's or Simon Haas's latest class. And it's well worth listening to if you haven't listened to that already. So this is, we're going to be speaking about Bhagavad Gita chapter 2, verse 15, which is the next verse after the one that Simon did. And I've entitled this verse, Surfing the Waves of Duality, which is a little bit of a creative title, but I thought it worked quite well. And the subtitle, therefore, is How to Remain Equipoised whilst tolerating or experiencing the inevitable dualities of everyday life. So this is a really relevant verse for everybody, because everyone everywhere in daily life is experiencing these ups and downs, and how to actually remain equipoised during these inevitable changes. It's a very important instruction, and it's one that Krishna gives to Arjuna during his time on the battlefield. So before I begin, I'm going to do a quick auspicious invocation called a Mangala Charana, which is just a prayer to my teacher and all previous teachers of this Bhagavad Gita. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namoram Vishnu Padaya Radhikaye Priyatmane Shri Srimad Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Goswami Tinamine. So in this session, we're going to discuss a little bit about the nature of the senses and their sense objects. What does that mean? Because some people may not be familiar with this language of sense objects, and what are the senses according to the Vedic perspective, and also what is the duality that is experienced through those senses, and how the senses react to that duality that we experience within the world. And then also, most importantly, how to deal with or remain steady during the happiness and distress that is caused by the ups and downs or dualities, if you like, of everyday life. So that's what we're going to try and discuss today. So let's have a look at the verse, Sienna. We'll read the verse. So this is, as I said, Bhagavad Gita, chapter 2, verse 15. And it's Krishna speaking to Arjuna. So he says, O best among men, Arjuna, the person who is not disturbed by happiness and distress and is steady in both is certainly eligible for liberation. So another translation of this verse that I have is very similar, but it's from my own spiritual master's Bhagavad Gita. He translated it as, O best among men, that sober person who remains undisturbed despite the dualities caused by sense perception, and who considers happiness and distress to be the same, is certainly qualified for liberation from the endless cycle of birth and death. So the meaning is the same, just slightly different language and a little bit more expanded. So we're going to unpack this verse. And there's a lot in it, so I'll try my best within 30 minutes to unpack as much as I can. according to what I've heard from my teacher. And as I always say at the beginning of these classes, this is not my own interpretation or my own idea. This is coming directly from Bhagavad Gita, which has been passed down through generations of spiritual masters to their disciples from 5,000 years ago into this present day. And this knowledge has been passed down in this, what is called Guru Parampara, that is the chain of guru to disciple, unchanged. So we're receiving this knowledge within the world today, within our modern day lives, exactly as it was given to Arjuna on the battlefield 5,000 years ago, and it's just as relevant, really. So, if not more relevant, because the world is inevitably becomes more difficult as time goes on. So let's look a little bit about, discuss what is sense perception, because it says in this verse that that sober person who remains undisturbed despite the dualities caused by sense perception. So, what do we understand by senses and sense perception? So, really, our experience within this world is the interaction of the senses with the world, or what we could also call the sense object. So, the experience of the senses interacting with their sense objects. And mostly this is our day-to-day experience. This is really life. So the five senses are, as explained from the Vedic point of view and from scientific point of view, actually, are the eyes, the power of sight, the ears, the power of hearing, nose with the power of smell, skin, the power of touch, and also the tongue with the power of taste. So through these five senses, we experience the world. We experience sight, vision. We experience sound. We smell. We touch, and we taste, and we interact with the world through these. These are called the Gyan Indriya in Sanskrit. That means knowledge acquiring senses. So this is quite an interesting name for them, because that's really what they're doing. They're acquiring knowledge of our environment and helping us to live within that environment and interact within the environment. So from the Vedic perspective, there are 10 senses, actually, because there are also, I thought I'd just touch on this for future episodes, there's also what's called the Karma Indriya, which are the active senses. So we've got the knowledge acquiring senses, but we've also got the active senses, and those are the power of the arms, the power of the legs, so the power to do things and move around, the power of speech, the power of digestion, and also the power of reproduction. So these are also considered, from the Vedic perspective, they are considered senses also, but they're called working senses, or karma indriya. And so we interact with the environment of this world through these senses, and they provide information to us about the environment. Right? This sounds very very logical, but if we really think about this, this is our day-to-day interaction with the world through the senses like this. And it's not just us humans that have senses, obviously, that all living entities have senses of some description or another. So you can think also that some animals, birds, for instance, they have particularly powerful senses, like birds of prey, eagles, and we've got a lot of buzzards flying over us at the moment. They can see great distances. They can see that small prey like this, which we wouldn't be able to see. Also, there's an example of dogs. So dogs have a very powerful sense of smell, like you've seen dogs that can track people through forests just by smelling some of their clothing. So all living entities, really, all embodied living entities, animals, birds, fish, even plants, trees, they all have some type of sense perception, with which they interact with the environment like this. So these senses, going back to the verse, these senses, they connect us with the environment, and they perceive positive and negative sensation, which is positive and negative is subjective, because it can be that some things may smell good to some person and not smell so good to another person, or look nice to one person, or sound nice, like the music I listened to when I was a teenager my mother thought sounded awful. So it can be a little bit subjective in that way, but they connect us with the environment, and then we perceive them positively and negatively. And we have to think also that the king of the senses, we can say there's 11 senses actually. The king of the senses is the mind, because all of these senses, the five knowledge acquiring senses and the five working senses, they are all connected to the mind, and the mind processes all this information, if you like a sort of not an artificial intelligence, a real intelligence, but they processes all this information. So therefore, the mind is said to be like the king of the senses, and like say through these senses we navigate the world, and really they're essential for our day-to-day survival. So you can imagine when we were hunter-gatherers, some still are, we would use our senses to avoid being preyed upon, to find food, to just to navigate the world and survive, really. So an important thing to note, though, about the senses is that they are limited. So, for instance, our vision, we can see a certain spectrum of light. We cannot see ultraviolet light. We cannot see infrared light. Some animals, they have a broader spectrum. And also sound, we cannot hear some sounds that dogs can hear, like a full spectrum of frequencies. So we have these senses with which we react, with which we interact with the world, but we're only getting sort of, part of the picture as well, if you like. We're only getting a sort of limited scope of actually what is out there. So that's a little bit about sense perception and what are the five senses. So let's talk a little bit about the happiness and distress that is caused by the perception of the senses, and this perceived duality that we experience within the world. So, as we know, just by observation of the world that we live in, things within, we call the material world, or this planet, they are constantly in flux. So they are constantly changing from moment to moment. Everything is in movement, and it's said to be the nature of the material world that things are cyclic and they are temporary. Nothing really stays constant, if you like. For example, we experience the seasons. So we experience autumn or fall, if you're from America, winter, spring, summer, and they rotate like this. And according to where we live, there are different types of extremes. We could live in northern Russia and experience minus 40 degrees, or we could live in central India and experience plus 50 degrees. And actually in the UK, it's not too extreme, but still we experience this cyclic changes of the seasons, and therefore, as it says in the verse before, we experience heat, we experience cold, and this type of duality within the world causes us to feel happiness and distress, positive and negative, like this. For example, we may be sitting outside on a beautiful, warm, sunny day in a nice chair with a drink and experiencing the sun on our skin, and there's no wind, and it's just very, very peaceful. And this causes obviously a reaction of happiness in most people. Or we may be at the middle of a great winter storm with blizzards and rain and ice and snow, and this causes some distress. So this is one example of the duality of this world causing us to feel in different ways. Another example of this, which we will go into later in the Bhagavad Gita, so I'm not going to get in too much into it now, about the changing nature of this world, are what are called the three gunas. And if anybody who's practicing any type of yoga will probably have heard of these. They're the qualities of material nature, or the modes of material nature. That is sattva, or the mode of goodness; rajas, or the mode of passion; and tamas, the mode of ignorance or inertia. So the material world is constantly, our environment is constantly also influenced by the cycling of this goodness, this passion, and this darkness or ignorance. So as we are looking at it or interacting with it, it's constantly changing. For instance, in the morning, we may get up quite early and feel like quite peaceful and meditative and in the mode of goodness. But then by the time lunchtime comes, then the sun is high, the mode of passion is influencing the environment, like where we are at the moment. I give this class at 1 p.m., which is kind of like the height of the mode of passion. So we may be experiencing that, or like at nighttime, the environment is dark usually, and we sleep, and then the mode of tamas or ignorance is prominent. So in this way, we are dealing with a constantly changing environment. So this is what Krishna is instructing Arjuna, is to try to remain steady and equipoised within this environment. Otherwise, we become just completely carried away with the influence of the material world. And who is perceiving this? Because I'm talking about we, and we experience this. That is, as we've said before, the true self. That is the Atma, or the spirit soul. And the Atma, the spirit soul, is experiencing its environment through the mind and through the medium of the senses. So this is something that they don't teach you at school. Well, at least not the school I went to. They don't teach you that this is actually the situation of the material world. Really, most people, and in most situations, they take all of this to be the only type of reality, and therefore become extremely happy or extremely disturbed like this. So what is common to all of this is that the senses are interacting with the dualities of this world, causing us to feel happiness and conversely distress. And these are the constant ups and downs, as I was explaining. Constant ups and downs of embodied life. So what are some more examples of duality that we experience? There's many examples. Some others are, we discussed heat and cold. That's one type of duality. Birth and death. So this is also something that is common to all. Love and hatred, day, night, the seasons, summer and winter. So we are constantly experiencing these types of dualities in this world, and therefore Krishna is instructing Arjuna. He's calling him the best of humans. He's saying to simply tolerate these inevitable ups and downs. So what is really the secret to tolerating? Because as Sundar was saying in his last class, which has not been uploaded yet, it's not just a case of gritting your teeth and forcing yourself to tolerate through these things. There are various types of practice or ways of situating our consciousness that can help a great deal with this. And as Simon said in his last class, that I'm not going to go too much into this, but if you can refer back to that class when it's uploaded, that we don't need to make too much of a story out of it. So if we're experiencing pain, he said very powerful statement. He said that pain is inevitable because we all experience pain, suffering, and happiness like this. But the suffering actually isn't inevitable. So suffering comes by making like a story out of our pain. Oh, today is so cold and I'm suffering so much because it's so cold. When will it get warm? I wish I could go somewhere that's warm. So the mind creates this whole sort of drama and story around our pain. So, like I said, I won't go too much into that because Simon's covered that in detail. So therefore, Krishna is advising Arjuna to become equipoised and become, he says a little bit later, that Arjuna should become a yogi, or in other words, somebody who is centered in the self. So a yogi, yoga literally means to connect, like two things. It's almost like the old English word yoke. So if you yoke cattle and a cart together, it's like to join two things together like this. So yoga really means to unite our self with the supreme self, which the Bhagavad Gita is all about, really. If you wanted to sum up the Bhagavad Gita in one sentence, it's to do your duty, in other words, your responsibilities within this world, but while keeping your mind, your consciousness focused on divinity or the divine, not to forget about that aspect. Some people will say, oh, Bhagavad Gita just means the ultimate conclusion is to just do your duty, but really it's to do your duty whilst remaining fixed on the spiritual, if you like, on the spiritual aspect of life and the spiritual nature of the self. So therefore, Krishna is advising Arjuna to be a yogi, and part of that involves to control the senses, not to let the senses just pull us in all directions. Simon explained in his previous class that there's an example, the soul is like on a chariot, and this chariot has 5 horses, and the chariot is the 5 horses are like the 5 senses, and they are pulling us in all types of directions like this. So a yogi learns to become a master of the senses. The senses still have to interact with their sense objects because we're still within this world, but to master them and not let us pull them in all types of direction. So there's another verse which is quite relevant to this, and also I'm saying this verse because in our lineage, it's a very sacred week this week. In Vrindavan, which is our sort of spiritual home, they are celebrating the swing festival of Sri Radhakrishna, and also Srila Rupa Goswami, who was a great teacher in our line. It was his, I think, yesterday, his appearance day. So Rupa Goswami, in his first teachings about yoga, he gave a very beautiful verse. He said, Vacho Vegam, Manasakroda Vegam, Jiva Vegam, Udara Pasta Vegam, Etan Vegan Yo Vishahetadira, Savam Apimam Prithivim Sasisyat. So Rupa Goswami here is giving his first teachings for somebody who wants to become a yogi or a sense control person. He's saying that person who can tolerate the urge to speak, the mind, the onset of Vachavegam, Manasakrodavegam, the constant movement of the mind, Vachavegam, Manasakrodavegam, the onset of anger, Jivavegam, the constant desire of the tongue to taste all types of delicious foods, and Udarapastavegam, that means the belly and the reproductive organs. That person who could control those aspects of themselves, they are qualified to instruct the entire world. So this is Rupa Goswami's really like first step into yoga is to try to control these urges of the senses and become a self-controlled person, to become a Goswami, as we say. So Go means senses, and Swami means controller of the senses. So therefore we call our great teachers, we call them Goswami, because they're not affected by their senses. So we can refer back a little bit to previous classes and think that the soul, we've discussed that I am not this physical body. In other words, who am I? I'm an eternal spiritual entity residing within a material body, which is like our vehicle for this world. So therefore, I had a teacher who was not necessarily, he wasn't a Bhakti Yoga teacher, but he was, before I met my Bhakti Yoga teacher, this chap I met who lived in a caravan very simply. And he used to say to me when I was disturbed, he would say, how can it possibly affect you? How can these things possibly affect you? And I never really understood at the time what he meant. But now I'm thinking, that because we're purely spiritual and we are residing within a material world, therefore, how can the material world actually affect us unless we allow it to? So we discussed a little in my last class that the spirit and material world, they're a little bit like oil and water. They can coexist, but they don't necessarily mix. So therefore, the suffering that is created within this world is somewhat to do with our identification with the body and our identification with this world as our home. The example is given of this, that a man is holding onto a tree like this, and he's shouting, "Help me, help me! The tree has got me! The tree has got me!" Understand? So the tree hasn't got the man has got the tree, but he thinks he's been captured by the tree. So this is like similar to our situation within this world, is that we are choosing to identify with the body and the world, and then imagining that we are captured and affected by the world, when actually we are completely separate spiritual entities. Another example that's given is like there's a way to catch a monkey, apparently in India. I've been told that you take a pot, like a clay pot, with a very sort of narrow neck, big enough to get an apple or a banana inside the pot, but not big enough. So what happens is the monkey goes to the pot, puts his hand in the pot and grabs the banana, but then he cannot get his hand out of the pot because of the narrow neck. So then the monkey's thinking, oh, the pot has got me, like this. But actually, it's his choice to hold on to the banana that is causing him to be trapped by the pot. So this is the same as our situation within this world as pure spiritual beings, identifying with this world, when actually the suffering is coming because of that identification. Maybe I'm not explaining it that well, but anyway, those are the examples. So therefore we suffer because of our misplaced identification, when in fact we are separate and aloof from the world. So this is one way we can think about this. So in the title, I mentioned surfing the waves of duality. So this is another nice example that I like to think of, that if we are in the ocean, then constantly the ocean is going up and coming down, and there are constant waves like this. And if we just sit in the ocean, then we are going up and down like this, and we may be distressed by that movement of ups and downs. And this is like the material world. But if you sit and watch people surfing, what do? They catch that wave and they remain on a constant level within that wave. Understand? So they ride that wave. So they're no longer going up and down. but they're sort of moving along and riding the wave, and they have a constant within them. In other words, they're not disturbed by the ups and downs. So this is a little bit like, I like to think, a little bit like material life. So every day we are sort of, as it's explained in another place in the Gita, we are like riding on a machine made of material nature. So we're constantly like riding on this thing, like that's going up and down. But as Krishna is advising Arjuna here, we try to remain on a level, on a constant level. Another example is, I don't want to hit you with too many examples here, but another example is like, do you know a sine wave? So a sine wave is like this. You see on an oscilloscope, sine wave goes up and down, and it's going up and down along a constant axis like this. So it's constantly oscillating up and down. So that constant line within the sine wave, we can think that that is where Krishna is advising Arjuna to be. Understand? So we're not following the line up and down and experiencing happiness and distress due to that change. We are trying to keep a constant and remain centered and equipoised. So this is an interesting meditation, if you like, on how to remain centered. And so therefore we're going to discuss a little bit also about how this is possible, how it is possible to remain equipoised and centered and have equanimity when everything around you is kind of going like this. So as Simon also discussed in his last episode, that one way, or really I think the way, is to develop a spiritual practice. Because as we said before, the Atma, or the self, the true self, is not moving around at all. He is constant, he's eternal, he's never changing, he's not destroyed, he's not created. He's or she is a constant spiritual entity like this. So therefore, by focusing on that never changing self within, and being content within the self, this keeps us on that. This keeps us on that line of not becoming happy and distressed and going up and down like on the roller coaster of life. Oh, sorry. So just wanted to discuss a little bit also about meditation practice. That's something Simon was also talking about. So meditation practice is one way to keep us on this, to have this constant within our lives. And there's different types of meditation practice. One is commonly called mindfulness, and that is simply just sitting still and observing the environment, observing the changing mind, observing the pulling of the senses, and trying not to react, just acknowledging those movements. So this is actually a very powerful practice to calm oneself down. And Simon talks a little bit more about this type of practice. So somebody may just sit in the middle of a forest and just observe nature, observe what's going on in one's mind, and acknowledge that, and just simply remain, not react to it. So this is one type of meditation. Another type of Vedic meditation that is called mantra meditation. So that is also touched on a little bit in the last class, where we take powerful sound vibrations and repeat that or meditate on that mantra. And mantra literally means man means mind, and tra means triate, which means to liberate the mind. So therefore, by having that mantra meditation as our spiritual practice and focusing on that mantra, that also keeps us on the constant center line and helps us to remain spiritually grounded, whilst everything else is going on around us. And this mantra meditation is very powerful as well, because we can also take it out into the environment. It's not just something we can do sitting at home in the lotus position. It's something that if you're on the bus or stuck in traffic or at work or whatever, then this mantra can become like a spiritual constant within our lives as the world is moving like this. But as with all of these spiritual practices, it is a practice in Sanskrit that is called sadhana. So it's not like all of a sudden you will start meditation or mantra meditation and everything will be perfect, because we've practiced in the material world so much to come to this point of our sort of material knowledge, if you like. So with our spiritual knowledge, we need also a spiritual practice. That means a sadhana, which means every day we can take time out and do a little bit of meditation, a little bit of mantra meditation, and slowly, by feeding the bird in the cage, we can attain this equanimity of yoga. So just one more thing, in the verse also it's said that one becomes qualified, eligible, it says, that person who is not disturbed by happiness and distress and is steady in both is certainly eligible for liberation. So in the last couple of minutes, I just wanted to discuss a little bit about liberation, because that's also a vast subject. So, as I said just a minute ago, that one of the meanings of mantra is triyate, which it's the sound vibration which liberates the mind. So we can also think that this liberation means that within this world we are liberated from that suffering of the senses are bringing to us, our perception of our senses and that duality. But also it means that type of liberation. That means also when we become spiritually adept and perfect in chanting the mantra, then this samsaric cycle that we are within, that is birth and death within the material realm, that can also come to an end. So that is also another type of liberation, but I don't want to get too much into that very esoteric topic. But really that is part of life, and the teachings of the Gita is that ultimately we're not aiming to stay within this world life after life after life inevitably. That there are other levels with which we can transition to by spiritual practice, this type of liberation, or mukti in Sanskrit, we call it. So therefore we discussed about the senses and their sense objects. We also discussed the duality and the happiness and distress that is experienced through the senses. And we also discussed a little bit about how to remain equipoised during life and during our sojourn, if you like, within this world. So I hope this has been useful for anyone, any viewer. And I'd like to end my talk here. And if there's any questions, then
Yeah, thank you so much, Madhu for everything you've shared with us today. We do have one question from Jessica. I think you definitely touched on this a little, but Jessica says, thanks so much for the class. What can help us control our senses, and does control mean that we shouldn't use them?
Right. So we did touch a little bit on this at the end in firstly in developing a spiritual practice in terms of meditation or a yoga practice, or that which is focused within. So to develop that and practice that, Another way I found very useful in my own experience of controlling my own senses, because I was actually a monk for about 13 years, and I lived in India, and I traveled all over the world with my spiritual master. And obviously, being celibate and being a monk, then there needed to be also sense control within that. But the most powerful thing I found, even more powerful than my own spiritual practice, or reading the Gita or anything, was associating with those who have already controlled their senses. And I meant to mention this in the class, actually. So thanks for bringing it up. But if we associate, or we choose to be with, those who either have already mastered their senses, like someone like our great spiritual teachers, or even those who are just trying to master their senses, then this helps a great deal in sense control. Because obviously, if we go out with and associate with people who are just completely wild and want sense enjoyment, drinking, dancing, everything, then we become like that. We become like our association. But if we associate with spiritually minded people, and ultimately those who have controlled their senses, um, it becomes actually a lot easier. My Gurudev said actually he never made any separate endeavor to control his senses. He simply focused on the teachings of Bhagavad Gita, Srimad Bhagavatam, the teachings of his spiritual master, and engaged his senses in service to them. So this is getting a little bit more into the practice of Bhakti Yoga, which the Bhagavad Gita discusses later. And the second part of the question, does control mean that we should not use them? Absolutely not, because especially in our tradition, we are not just trying to refrain the senses from their sense objects, because it's said that that is like trying to hold a spring, that if you've got a big, powerful spring, you can push the spring in for a certain amount of time, but at some point you'll get tired and the spring will again come back like this. So artificially controlling the senses doesn't necessarily work long term. So Bhakti Yoga's answer to controlling the senses is to engage them in spiritual activity. So the tongue can be engaged in chanting mantra, the mind can be engaged in remembering the teachings of Bhagavad Gita, for instance. The legs can be engaged in going to the yoga studio or the temple, or like this. So our senses can be engaged, and therefore naturally they become controlled. So no, it doesn't at all mean that we should try to sit in a dark room, not see anything, not hear anything, and not. It's impossible. We are in the material world. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much. Great response. We also have a great comment from Colleen. Colleen says, thank you for the clear and enlightening class. I will try to feed the bird in the cage with a mantra. So
Brilliant. Yes. Okay. Good. Me too. I'm also a
yeah,
practitioner. I have to remember to do that.
absolutely. Yeah, so thank you so much, Madhu, for
Thank
joining
you,
us
Sarah.
today, for taking the time to address these questions and reflections. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you so much, Sienna. See you again.
Thank you again for everyone who joined us today. Simon Haas's previous class on verse 14 should be up about 1 week from today. We'll link it later in the description on this video. But feel free to join us again on Monday at 7:30 p.m. to continue this journey through the Bhagavad Gita.